Learning exactly how ignored you have actually been is the strangest thing about getting older. My age is 88 years old. I am Arthur Bennett. I worked hard to make others happy most of my life, yet they tend to forget about me as soon as I left. Almost 90 years passed before I understood that the only people truly interested in me were those around my dinner table. I used to believe when I was younger that one had to earn respect in front of people. Growing up, I learned that a man's worth was determined by the firmness of his handshake, the cleanliness of his shoes, and how many people nodded along with his words. My father never expressed, "I love you." He would advise, "Do well for yourself." So I tried to accomplish exactly that. 42 years I spent employed at a production firm. I started in the warehouse carrying big boxes until my back hurt as I observed the bosses pass by in their immaculate shirts and glittering watches. Many times I believed I would at last feel significant if I could only acquire an office bearing my name. So I put in long hours. I worked on tasks no one else wanted to do. I missed school presentations and Little League games because I constantly had another report to finish or another meeting where I hoped to say something clever enough to draw notice. I would say, "I'm doing this for us," when Margaret, my wife, would ask if I could return home sooner. I am creating something, and I was making something. Promotions arrived gradually, but they did materialize. From the warehouse, I advanced to a desk. Next, from a desk to a tiny office. Then ultimately to a corner office with a window. I shut the door and simply observed the parking lot below on my first day there. I was sure, proud, but above all, I felt relieved. I believed I had at last achieved my aim. Back then, I didn't realize how fast people adapted to my change of status. The congratulations went on roughly a week. Handshakes started to seem natural. I was referred to as Arthur from management not too long ago. Those same men who once terrified me now wanted me to do favors. The younger workers gazed at me like I used to view my superiors, as if I were a ladder for them to advance. I tried desperately to cling to that sensation of being remarkable. I purchased a flashier vehicle than we actually required, since I appreciated the way the neighbors regarded it. I joined the country club as it included significant persons. I offered my time to committees when I could sit at long tables and argue about issues that, looking back, were utterly insignificant. I always had an audience in mind. I wondered what they thought as I talked, how they evaluated my attire, my home, and my profession. I found myself wanting someone to notice how much I gave instead of the silent prayer I said behind it, even at church. Margaret prepared the table 6 times every evening meanwhile, using the same plates we had for years, one of which had a little chip she would not discard. She had a basic approach to doing things. When they were young, our 2 children would sit across from me recounting stories about their day. I heard, but not quite. Another part of me was still at work, reviewing prior interactions and organizing for the successes of the following day. One evening sticks out in my mind. The next day, my son was attending a science fair. He wished for me to view his solar system project. I told him I was exhausted. I had an early appointment and we could go over it over the weekend. He agreed, but not until years later, when he brought it up at a family reunion and said with a chuckle how Mom always came instead of Dad, did I understand how frustrated he was. Though it struck me hard in the chest, he intended it to be humorous. To be honest, I was not a villain. I was interested in my family. I put a lot of effort into helping them. I fixed the sink on Sundays, paid bills, and saved for their college in addition to the usual expenses. I confused, though, being there with giving. I figured if others appreciated my work, my family would simply feel secure and proud without me needing to be there much. Time has a means of revealing the truth to you. I retired at 65 with a small gathering in the conference room. A sheet cake had my name written somewhat incorrectly. Several individuals complimented my leadership and dedication. I shook hands, received a plaque, then drove home carrying a box of my stuff. Monday morning, someone else was sitting in my former chair. My phone quit ringing in under a year. My former colleagues were engrossed in their fresh assignments. The business proceeded without me. Fresh ideas brought new supervisors. The projects I had invested a lot of effort in were altered, replaced, or entirely forgotten. I occasionally came across a coworker at the supermarket. They would greet me with, "Arthur, how is retirement?" After some courteous comments, they would look away and peruse the aisle for something else. It was then I realized I had never truly been the most important thing in their life. At best, I was just a background player. My children all had grown up around that time. They had their own families and hectic schedules. I knew they valued me. They would find me whenever they could. But I began to see that we were apart not as a result of any arguments, but rather as a consequence of several small occasions when they were absent. But Margaret was still here. Every morning she would sit with me at the kitchen table, drinking her coffee, and inquire about my sleep quality, worries, and pain level. Though I frequently neglected her, she had always been my devoted listener. Not long after I turned 72, one day I questioned her something I had been thinking about. I inquired, "Do you believe I did a decent job?" She fixed her gaze at me serenely and said, "Good job at what?" I discussed my salary increases, our home, my savings, and how others honored me. She paid close attention and then responded something I have never forgotten. She remarked, "Arthur, you labored hard to be appreciated. I simply want you to give being truly known that same attention." She spoke it without resentment at all. It was only a sort of truth we knew together. Margaret died 81 years ago. The house felt too silent. Nobody found the car in the driveway to be spectacular any longer. My retirement plaque sat covered in dust on an office shelf. At the dinner table, I would sit by myself and consider every meal I had hurried through, as well as every story I had just half heard. I began to see something in the quiet that had always been obvious. I yearned, just briefly, for the applause. Positions switch. Neighbors move away. Strangers go on. People's acceptance is rather fleeting. But those times when you truly listen and gaze into your child's eyes last. Sitting beside your wife at a typical Tuesday dinner and inquiring about her day as though it means more than anything else produces something considerably more powerful than simply a favorable reputation. I formerly assumed that somewhere out there my audience was waiting to be amazed. They were actually at my table, passing the salt, sharing about their day, hoping I would look up long enough to notice them. I'm 88 years old and not particularly interested in trying to impress anyone. When I pour coffee, my hands tremor somewhat. I stroll more leisurely nowadays. Nobody gets up when I walk into a room. No one is eager to know my opinion. Strangely, this seems freeing. Whenever I can, I try to see my grandchildren and children. I wait silently as they converse. I inquire of them. I watch their faces. I find myself occasionally wishing to tell them tales of my past accomplishments to remind them I was formerly important. But then I understand they don't need reminders of my past. All they want from me right now is to be there. I wouldn't advise my younger self, the guy hurrying from work to a dinner he barely enjoyed, to abandon his goals or his career. I would only advise him to check around the table and see that family love is more trustworthy than feeling respected by strangers. Spending years working to influence others' perception of you might be fruitless, since those who really count don't need to be impressed. They simply yearn to feel like they belong. Therefore, if you are listening to me and you are pursuing your next promotion, next compliment, or that next moment when a significant person notices you, wherever you might be, I would not say to stop. I'll simply pose a mild inquiry. Will you observe who is seated across from you when you settle down for dinner tonight after arriving home? Because one day you could be seated at a quiet table and come to see that the cheers have vanished, the audience has left, and the only faces that truly mattered were the ones you nearly disregarded. At 88 years old, Arthur Bennett here, I have learned this one thing that might be useful. Although the world forgets things more rapidly than you could imagine, the individuals who love you remember how you made them feel for their whole life.